a moment where we have to embrace who we are, but we have to also understand that we come from a lot of great places and a lot of great stories and a lot of great cultures and races, and we don't really have to prove anything to anybody.
I think that we need to realize that telling our stories the way we want to tell our stories is our power.
First of all, I'm David Magdael. And this is my 20th Sundance. Woo! It's a long way. And it's interesting, looking around this room and even on the streets this week, it never looked like this 20 years ago. So I applaud you guys for even coming and showing up, and then for showing up to this today. So give yourselves a round of applause, please. My day job is I'm a publicist doing most of my work in the documentary sphere. I'm also one of the co-directors of the Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival. And, you know, for me personally, this has always been my dream, that we could look across a room, you know, in Park City and see all of these different faces. And this room, particularly today, it's not just Asian American, you know, because it is a Center for Asian American Media, but it's all of us. And that's something that we were talking about earlier with the panelists, that this is a time for all of us to collaborate with ourselves, cross communities, all of our allies, and encourage and support our older artists as well as the new ones that are coming up. I think this is the moment. I think like Dawn was saying, this is the time, this is our time, this is your time, and we need to own this time. So I encourage you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. And thank you for coming to Park City, because it's not cheap and it's hard up here. And, you know, there are hills. And, you know, it's like, so anyway. So without that, and I also want to thank CAAM and the Sundance Institute for allowing us to put this together and being here, because I think this conversation is so important at this moment in time. So thank you to CAAM, and to it is Karim Amer for helping us from the Sundance Institute put this together. Please give them a round of applause. So without further ado, let's bring our panelists up. From Level Forward, I have Abigail Disney, right there. From Harness, it's Marya Bangee, please. From Array, please welcome Tilane Jones. All right. And then representing the filmmakers, my little brother, Karim, Amer. Yes. This is so great. As we were talking about, we're looking at 2018, 2019, and I think a lot of us feel that there's been change that's been going on in the air. And I know we all felt it. We felt it a while, for maybe the last 2, maybe 3 years. And I know in the artist community, people were talking about, okay, I need to use my artwork. I need to make change. I need to resist, you know, be part of the resistance. I don't know. I felt the other direction. I felt like I think we need to embrace. And I think we as artists, you as artists, we as, you know, communities that you're speaking to, we need to embrace ourselves, embrace our artists, embrace the agencies, embrace our allies, so that we're all working together. But with that, I want each one of you to introduce yourselves and introduce the projects that you are working on and what all of your agencies do, because I want everybody out of here, when we leave here, we know who these 4 people are. We know who CAAM is, so that way, for those of you who are working in the trenches as artists and filmmakers, you know where your resources can be. Okay, so let's start with Abigail.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Abigail Disney. I started filmmaking only about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, but I was active in the nonprofit community around organizing and activism with low-income people around the world, especially women. And that's why I started making films. So I started a company called Fork Films, made a film called Pray the Devil Back to Hell, and a couple years ago, The Armor of Light and Women, War, and Peace, which the second group of films are going to be on the air in March, 25th and 26th on PBS. And about a year ago here at Sundance, we founded something called Level Forward, which I'm really proud of. And we're trying to get a critical mass of women and people of color and everybody else who's been left out of the picture on the screen, off the screen, behind the camera, in every other way, represented and telling their own stories.
Great. And let's move over to Marya.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my background, this is actually the first Sundance that I've ever attended. I started my work as a community organizer, really working in LA with communities of color, doing work around access to healthcare and education, and my life was completely flipped upside down after the 2016 election, as I'm sure some of you can relate with. And one of the things that happened was that there was this incredible push of people from within the entertainment industry who wanted to use their platform to start to rectify some of the problems that they saw. And initially, I was very skeptical of that work. And what happened, and I can talk a little bit more about this, is I started working with America Ferrera, Wilmer Valderrama, and Ryan Pierce Williams, three people who come from the entertainment world and who felt very strongly that we needed to bring together artists who have this incredible power and storytelling capacity with social justice leaders and people from the most vulnerable communities so that we could really reimagine a new world. And so we do that through work with networks and studios. We work with NBC, Universal, Netflix, Sundance, and others to do a lot of work with executives and creatives. And then we also do that through building community between artists and activists for social change. So.
Wow, great. And then let me, Tilane, let's hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming, first of all. My name is Tilane Jones, and I'm Vice President of Array. Array is a film distribution collaborative that was founded by filmmaker Ava DuVernay in 2008. And we distribute films by independent filmmakers of color and women of all kinds. We have now distributed 20 films over 8 years, and a lot of those films have come from different film festivals like Sundance. I think the mission of Array is really to just bring together audience, activists, and artists, and that's been our mission over this 8 years.
Wow. And Karim represents the filmmakers, and you have a film here at this festival, right?
I do. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Karim Amer. I'm a filmmaker. I'm Egyptian American, and grew up between both countries. And I had a film here a few years ago called The Square, about the Egyptian Revolution at Tahrir Square. And we have a film that premiered yesterday called The Great Hack, that just played. Thank you, guys. And we have a production company in New York called The Others, and we picked that name a few years ago because I've always, I've refused to kind of ever be reduced to a binary box to identify who I am, or to be reduced to that. And I think that we're in a moment where we have to embrace who we are, as David's saying, but we have to also, understand that we come from a lot of great places and a lot of great stories and a lot of great cultures and races, and we don't really have to prove anything to anybody. So like, I'm all for doing what we want to do, but I don't feel like I have to prove anything right now.
No, exactly that. And I think, moving forward with that, I mean, that's something that I think I know that a lot of, especially on the filmmaking side, have strived for, that you're creating things for the marketplace, but you're creating what you feel that you want to. And what we've seen too this year, and I think a lot of us can attest to, is that we've seen the marketplace kind of like designate what they want to see. And I think of, off the top of my head, I know everyone thinks, oh, Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians. Yes, those were moments, and which was great, and those were large. But I think it's something that was like even on FX, like Pose. You'd never seen an episodic or stories about the transgender and the transvestites that were in the 80s, and most of them were people of color. But those stories are all rich, and you look at who the production people that were behind it and the creators, and it was all of that. But given that, Karim, can you talk about how that was for you as a filmmaker, going from community filmmaking to the marketplace, and where do you see this like as we move forward? Everyone's like, oh, what's the next 3 to 5 years? But I think, what does this look like now and just beyond for you?
That's a lot. That's a big question, but okay. I'll see it.
We got 90 minutes.
Yeah. So I mean, I think what's interesting from my personal journey, at least, is to, you know, first, you know, I feel like there's like almost 3 stages of kind of being a I don't know, I don't know what language to use anymore. Person of color making stories, or immigrant, or whatever word you want to use, but coming from an other community, so to speak. And I think like the first phase is you're like, for me, being Egyptian and being in this moment in history and being able to capture this story, and then being seen as like, oh, it's important to, you know, to pay attention to a story happening over there, right, in this other world that's not part of the mainstream. And I think that's like the base level. And then the next level is, you know, well, oh my God, there's a story that's happening in a place over there, and the characters in it we can relate to, and we can see ourselves in them. And that's like when you can allow the other space to kind of mix with the main space, and create a bridge in your storytelling to allow for people to see themselves through this minority space. And then you become the kind of person to tell those stories. And then, of course, because I'm Egyptian American, obviously I would only want to tell stories about Egypt for the rest of my life, because I don't have any other story to tell. Grant, not that, you know, I grew up as an immigrant. No, I grew up in Miami half my life. That's not part of it. But I'm an Egyptian filmmaker. That's what I have to do. And again, that's why I refuse that binary. I don't want to be forced to pick that or that, because that's to say that you can only feel in a certain way. You can only your lens is limited to that lane only. And so even in helping me and patting me on the back and saying, we want to help expand your lane, there's a disconnect, because it's saying, well, what if I have bigger aspirations in that lane? What if I don't want to just be in that lane? And so for me, it became even more complicated, because, you know, being, you know, in Middle Eastern and American, you know, you're born. You know, you're born on a crisis line, right, of identity. I mean, it is similar to other experiences, of course, as well, in its own way. But the war on terror the last 18 years has been a feeling like, you know, we have to wake. You know, a lot of us feel like we're losing our identity, as our good friend Riz Ahmed says, every day to tomorrow's headline. You know, that's kind of the feeling that we have. And so with Trump coming to power, it was like, oh shit, what do we do? Do we tell? We got to like team up and be like all Muslim America now, do all the Muslim stories. And there was a part of me that was pushing to that. And then I was like, you know what? I don't feel that way right now. And actually, I'm going to tell a story about America that has nothing to do with immigration or identity, really, and has to do with how democracy is fundamentally falling apart because of power not being held accountable. And I'm actually going to tell an American story, and that's going to have nothing to do with who I am. And I'm actually going to be invisible, but more visible than ever in a way. And then you're going to see a movie called The Great Hack, and it's going to be a rewriting of American history, but it doesn't matter that it's made by a guy named Karim and Jahan, and immigrants, and Pedro Cos, all immigrants to this country, children of immigrants, you know, reclaiming this narrative. So I'm going to do that, and I don't care to be labeled as a cultural filmmaker or a person of color. I care to be just a person telling my story, and that's it.
But what I do love is that you do embrace that. You know, you embrace that culturalness that you do bring to the table. Because I find a lot of times there are some filmmakers who shy away from embracing who they are. But like you said, you want to tell that story, and that's a story that's burning inside you. And I think and you have every right to tell that. But
no, I fully embrace who I am. But what I'm saying is, like, it's like I want to be respected for my heritage and who I am, but I also don't want to be reduced artistically to one individual space. And I think that oftentimes when there's a helping hand, it's still because it's coming from this perspective that, like, you're gonna arrive, right? Like, your audition is coming, like, you'll be like us one day. We're trying to help you get here. And it's kind of like, but you don't understand why my story has never been included anyway, you know? And like, I come from a great people, and like, my identity of cultural thought wasn't born with the Renaissance, you know? I come from Egypt. We've been telling stories for 5,000 years. I don't need you to, you know, deem me worthy and deem me knowledgeable and a creature of light. The light didn't start with you, actually. Read your history, you know? But we don't have time to get into all that, right? So it's kind of like, you know, and the fact that you don't know about my history, and you don't know that the numbers you use are coming from my land, and half the science you use comes from my land, and you see me as an ignorant person who is a jihadi, that's your problem. That's on you. I don't have to teach you. I don't have to correct you. I don't have to retell the war on terror story. That's on you, not me. So you get your together.
And you do that so well. That's the best. But you know,
Not a choice.
Right? But let me just move over to Tilane. You know, I've been watching what you guys do over at Array, and you know, we worked with you together on Middle of Nowhere back in the day when Avo had won the Best Director out of here, and that was like the opening. I mean, it was always been open before, but it just felt like that was a space that, like, all of a sudden the door opened and this talent came through. And I felt with your with Array as the distribution arm of that, when you guys took that on and said, okay, no one is distributing these independent films that speak to me, or it speaks to the people that we know or that you know, and it's like, how do we figure this out? And then watching how you guys had done that, utilizing the community as that aspect to be that bridge, so that then the films that don't get out there that may end up like, you know, somewhere else that we don't know, you guys are able to put that. Can you talk about that genesis of where that came from? Because now you've opened up even more so, and now you have this creative space in historic Filipino town in LA that's really going to be, feels like this hub where people can come to and actually, you know, exchange ideas and develop things for each other. So can you talk about what you guys are doing over there?
Sure. I mean, when we started in 2008, it was as Affirm, which was the African American Film Festival Releasing Movement. And our focus was on films by African Americans and filmmakers from the African diaspora. But then along with that, you know, Ava started this because she knew that there would be no studio that would want to distribute her films. Films by a black woman, about black women. And so along our travels, as far as, you know, the films that she's created, the television shows she's recreated, we saw that there was a need, not just in our community, but in every community with people of color, and also with women. And so that's when we expanded to include those filmmakers as well. And I mean, as Karim was saying, I think that, you know, with Array and what we do as far as, you know, being that helping hand and being that distributor, you know, we're not here to tell you how to tell your story. We're just here to embrace it and help you distribute the story. Because like you said, we know, you know, the struggle that you have to go through to be able to create your film and create your own identity as a filmmaker. I think a lot of times, you know, filmmakers go through the process and they're always asked a question, especially filmmakers of color, you know, about their experience as a person of color. That's not what they should be asking you about. They should be asking you about the craft of filmmaking. And so, you know, we saw that need through the work that Ava has been doing and through the work that other filmmakers have been doing. And so we've embraced that and been able to distribute these 20 films, and also open this campus in Los Angeles to kind of embrace artists that are considered on the margins. And, you know, that way we know that working together, we can get a lot farther than working separately. And that's what Array means.
No, I agree. And it's like, you know, we're talking about things that are changing, and I talked about Pose, but I also think about Queen Sugar, which is on the OWN network.
Right.
And if you take a look, I don't know if you guys have been able to take a look at this, but take a look at that, because the stories that are coming out of there are stories that are out of New Orleans and Louisiana, but these are stories of African Americans that we've never seen before, and actors that we really kind of, well, she was in True Blood, and it was over there, but these people are in leads. These are in lead roles, and it's every different hue of African Americans from, you know, and that's always been that question. It's usually, oh, the light-skinned people get all the roles, or it's like, but, and you also embrace so many things. So I look at that as an example of what can be done, because that's always that question. We're in 2018, moving to 2019, and what can be done. And I look at what you guys have done, or what Ava's done with that particular TV show, because that writer's room, we were at something at the ArcLight, and she said, okay, I need to, you know, look at these are the people from the writer's room. When that writer's room group stood up, it was like everybody and everything. There was like, you know, and then you look at who the directors are, and who are the directors, though?
They're all women directors for every single episode, for 3 seasons.
But wait, but they're not just black women, right?
They're not. They're all women. So, I mean, I think more importantly than absolutely the story, because she's an African-American woman, so she draws from the African-American community, and it's about a family in the African-American community, but more importantly is the fact that the diversity in her crew, as well as making sure that every single episode is directed by a woman every single season, is important, not just for us, but for the industry, to show that this can be done. This is, people are mystified by this happening, but these are women who are very capable. There were many of them filmmakers who were just trying to get into the television industry, and she allowed that to happen. She opened that door for them. And so she's not the only one that can do this. Karim can do this. We all can do this, as creators and filmmakers and artists in the industry.
And I think today or yesterday was like Tessa Thompson made this declaration that she's going to now work with, was it all women,
yes.
right? In the next like 2 or 3 years, that's what her mantra is. And I think that's the thing that we're looking for. And I think that, even not just us in this room, but I think as a marketplace, like, I get tired of hearing like these industry people like, oh, we don't know where the people are. We don't think there's, these people, or they might know like one person, so they don't know Karim, or like they know Justin Chan or something like that. And in that film, he had his Miss Purple that's here. And you look at that film, and it's like he could have played that role, but he gave somebody else that opportunity to play the lead role because that was someone that was like hadn't had that opportunity, but he was able to do that. So I look at, these artists like Ava, like Amer, like you, Karim, and you're working with Pedro Cos. It's like bringing people on, but not talking about it and say, hey, look what I'm doing, but just doing it. And I think that's the most important. And then leading by example is what really is clear. And I'm finding, yes, Ava's the bigger name because she's out there in front, but people are finally kind of taking notice of what all of that can be and what all that is. And Abigail, you've been in the trenches a long time as an ally for everybody, and I've watched you over the years. And so you've seen what has been going on. What was that for you to say, this is what I'm going to do? Because you're Abigail Disney. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm just thinking like, we got Abigail Disney in the house. And I'm like, okay, great. But then, you don't have to, but you do.
Yeah. Thank you for appreciating that, actually. Yeah, because a lot of people say to me, well, why aren't you Paris Hilton? You could have such an easy life, right? So, privilege is an interesting thing. It's all about where you've been situated, and you didn't ask to be situated. Everybody knows there's a certain point when you're 13 or something, you yell at your parents, I didn't ask you to be my parents. And that's kind of, that's what privilege is. I didn't ask for it. I didn't earn it. And it means nothing about me, good or bad. What does say something about me, good or bad, is what I do with that, how aware I am of that, what I decide about that. And, I have this very high-profile last name, and from a very early age, it just felt like it was asking something of me. And I couldn't have articulated that to you for a really long time. But so I'm just turned 59 2 days ago. So I'm really only getting my head wrapped around it. It gets dismissed in me by people who don't, white people mostly, privileged people mostly, who don't want me to talk about this because of it's white fragility, but there's 1,000 kinds of fragility, privileged fragility. Because it makes them uncomfortable, because it gets dismissed as guilt. And guilt feels like such a dumb emotion. It feels like such a, what's the point in that? Nobody gains anything. But, it's actually been pretty much the fuel. And I wouldn't dismiss it as necessarily a horrible thing. But what I've started to understand is there's a difference between what I'm guilty of, which is mostly not much, and what I'm responsible for, which is a hell of a lot. And that's about how I was situated in life and on this planet, and with certain gifts I didn't ask for, but also with talents that I've developed. And the trick is to go forward and figure that out. Now, I understand colonization from a couple of different places, because obviously, I am a person who allies with all the kinds of privilege that we're all talking about here. But, within my own family, I'm also a girl. And if you've ever read A Room of One's Own, you'll know the kind of colonization that I'm aware of. And I find that a lot of women who come from highly patriarchal families like mine, they're quick to align with a more intersectional variety of feminism, because they come to understand what it is to be marginalized at a very personal level. Because marginalization, it may be political and structural, but it feels personal, no matter how it happens. And we get it personal from day one. So I think that's why I've made an effort to be a listener and to try to let myself learn from the people around me. I'm actually starting a project where I'm going to be trying to talk about white fragility to other white people, because I feel like it's the barrier at this point to having a genuine conversation. And I'm beginning to think I want to carry a little pin around that says, I'm not fragile. You can tell me if I say something stupid. I said something stupid to Tulane just like 10 minutes ago. I think you remember what I was talking about when people married each other and maybe, anyway. Yes. Yes. I wish I'd been wearing a pin that said, I'm not fragile, so Tilane could say, oh, Abby, that was some shit there. Because a lot pours out of my mouth, and sometimes it's stupid. So, you know, it's not, Karim, what you just said now was so powerful to me as you started, and it's like, you're the people who this is your problem. It's not my job to educate you. So for the allies among us, we sit here and we go, oh, okay, so where am I going to get my education from? What I've learned over time is by shutting up, you know. And I know it's me holding a microphone saying that's very. But you know, it's on us in many cases where we've been handed more power than we've earned, to give some of it away, because less of it's been handed to other people than they've earned, and you know, that's just too bad for you. So I'm watching my daughter as a filmmaker who has film in the festival, a short film as a producer, which is super cool. And I watched, she's 27, I watch her and her 27-year-old male friends, and I watch the way the male friends have their foot on the gas 100% all the time, never question themselves, no self-doubt, no nothing. And I watch the way she, with the same education and the same background, the same opportunities, doesn't feel ready, doesn't feel smart enough, doesn't feel... It's still going, guys. We have so much work to do. We have so much work to do. And I wish I could get to some of those guys who I don't fault at all, because they're just doing what their insides are telling them to do. I wish I could get to them and say, can you just slow your roll for a second, you know? Because you could use some self-doubt. First of all, it would be good for you. But, you know, just take a look around you. Ask some harder questions. Do we really need another movie about a struggling artist from Wesleyan who really is doubting whether he should, you know, stay with his girlfriend or not? Or, you know, or is there a better, more different story to tell? And it all comes back to Paris Hilton. Because I'll tell you something, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, Paris Hilton, Donald Trump, they're hurting inside more than you can possibly imagine. Privilege is painful. Privilege is toxic. Privilege is poison. And if you don't find a way to bring yourself into better position with it, if you don't question it, trot it out, look at it, dissect it, let other people give you for it, if you're too fragile to be able to talk about it, it's going to eat you alive. And I have seen people hollowed out from the inside, like Japanese beetles eat the tree. And then one day they just crack. So there is damage to us in this, too. We're hurting ourselves by holding this structure in position. And so in making ourselves allies, we are giving ourselves an incredible gift of a better future that looks like this room, which is my favorite kind of room to be in.
Thank you. That was great. And Marya, for you as well as like for Harness, where do you see your vision, and what do you want everybody in this room to take away from, you know, what you're doing at Harness? What can we do to help you do what you guys want to do over there?
Yeah. So I think part of the conversations we've been having before this panel was about skepticism, right? And this idea of like, this is a moment, and there have been other moments like this, and how do we really know that anything is going to change? And how do we structurally think about this work, right? Because this is an industry that at the end of the day doesn't have a moral center. It has, it's driven by financial incentive, right? So how do we make sure that we're thinking about the next 3, 5, 10 years, because we're in this incredible moment of transition. I want to talk a little bit about kind of how we understand that. I think there's a few things. The first thing I would say is that there's the kind of like social political reckoning that's happening in this country, right? That this administration has really highlighted. But beyond that, there's the demographic shift, which all of us know about, which is, that we're going to be a majority minority country in a few decades. And I think that is an incredibly powerful thing. I also think an incredibly powerful thing is the advent of digital media and social media. I don't think we can underplay. I think we're so used to talking about it that we don't realize how important it is in terms of being able to use it to advocate and to push back. And so when it's no longer cool to talk about intersectionality, like, we're still going to have new tools at our disposal to be able to intervene. And I think that's really important. It's, as an organizer, one of the things that I think is really important is we always give up our power. We never acknowledge, like, what is it that we can actually do? And then the last thing I would say is that financially, you're seeing a disruption of the market, right? And so the conversations that Harness is having with NBC, with Universal, with Netflix, with other industry partners is they're like, we don't really know, like, what our audiences is asking of us. Like, we don't know how to tell diverse stories. They know that, right? And they also know that they could become irrelevant, honestly, right? And so they're in this vulnerable moment, and that's when you go in and you make big asks and you're audacious, because we have leverage right now. So how do you use that leverage in a structural way, right? I'm a very organizer, so I apologize. I was talking to a group of artists. But so some of the ways that we've been doing this work is we've been working with our industry partners to really think through not just hiring process, but casting. We work directly with executives and creatives around, like, how do they think about funding new projects? How do they not only get educated and broaden their understanding, but connect with their heart space, and use their personal stories and personal experiences to connect with people outside of their kind of bubble, right? A lot of the work that we've done, especially initially, has been working directly with writers' rooms and with creatives. So an example of something we did was we had a big main stage event in Hollywood at the beginning of 2017. We had people like Shonda Rhimes and Katy Perry and heads of studios in the audience, and on stage were people from Standing Rock, and people that were leading the trans community movement, and people that were dealing with the Muslim ban, and people that were undocumented, and people that were the founders of Black Lives Matter. And they spoke, and they shared their voice, and the president of NBC called us and said, I want you to come in and speak to my writers' room, to speak to my showrunners, all of them. And so we did a program with their showrunners, and then they were like, well, can you do this again? And we said, no, you're gonna pay us, and we're gonna pay our communities. And so a big part of this has also been making the business case to understand that they need to make an investment in the incredible knowledge and expertise that diverse communities bring to the table. And they can't just be making money off of our communities all the time without, paying us for it. And so that's part of the work that we're looking at. And I think for us, it's about a sprint, honestly, in the next 2-3 years. How can we make the audacious ask? How can we change things structurally within these companies? And one of the most exciting partnerships has been with Netflix and digital media companies, because they're so ready and hungry to do something different. So how can we think ambitiously?
Can I just add to that? I didn't say much really about what Level 4 wants to do structurally, but you just named it. So we're structuring into the projections, financial projections of every project we do, what it's going to cost us to pay communities and not-for-profits to consult with us from the beginning, from the first word on a page to the end of the process. Partly because it's smart to build community for your project, so that when you do, but because they deserve to be paid for their work. And it's all about, like, what do you structure into your financials? That's what's going to stay. Yeah, and things will pass. And they weren't intersectional. Will go away. But we want the structure to stand regardless. So what you put into your P&L has everything to do. What's above the line has everything to do with what your priorities are. So we're also structuring gun neutrality into all of our films, which I know this isn't what this room is currently here for, but for every gun we see on screen, we're going to take 2 and destroy them off screen. So we want to take from top to bottom the entirety of what it is to be a good person on this earth and to spread good in the world and structure it financially into everything we do.
I think what all the panelists are really saying is that it's this decolonization of the industry, it's multidimensional. It's everywhere. It starts from the artist, from when you start to write your script, what your writer's rooms look like. It goes into production and what your crews look like. It goes into who you choose as a distributor for the work that you're creating. You know, and also in your audience and advocates. We have a row here of volunteers that help on every single release that we have. We call them Array Mavericks. You know, they're Mavericks because they're here supporting your work. So I think artists should just remember that, you know, everything you do throughout the whole process, you know, make sure that people throughout the process look like you and look like the world that you want to have.
No, I agree with all that. So you're talking with studios, and what's been, you know, you named like what the reaction is. Is it really real? Are they just giving you like FaceTime and like, oh yeah, why don't you talk to our writer's room? Yeah. Okay, and then is that it? Then they can just say like, oh, well, they talked to them. Oh, wait a minute, I've got like 10 projects that, you know, Karim Amer's doing, Jahan's doing, Tilane, and we're in bed with Ava DuVernay. We got Shonda Rhimes, and we've got America for Rare. So, you know, it feels sometimes often like a checklist. You know, it's right like, oh, I did
cool.
this one.
Right now it's cool.
It is cool, right?
White guilt is high.
Yeah.
We gotta cash in on it. I'm serious. Because there's 2 years left. Because, you know, I'm serious. Like, let's talk practically here. No, let's talk seriously. The 68% of white women voted for Donald Trump, and instead of Hillary Clinton, their own constituent, right? And I'm not going to talk about my support of Hillary Clinton or not, but that's besides the point. They didn't support their own constituent. So the crisis of American identity, right, spiraling, is happening among the white community, and it's because it's clinging on to a false mythology, and that's what we have to kind of get into. It's like we have to really, we're at a breaking point. Like, we have to either decide that we want these values, you know, like democracy and these big words we like to think are all American. And if we want them, then we have to rid ourselves of these false stories, right? The story of colonialization, which this story is based on, this country is built on, the initial, you know, the origin sin of initial colonial genocide that happened to the native people. Like, let's just talk about that and get that into the front line. You know, slavery, let's just own that and have an actual conversation about this and treat it like the Holocaust and actually get to a conclusion on it, as opposed to having this constant issue. Let's talk about how this country was built on colonizing. You know, America is the master of the world, but it's built on the backs of a lot of colonial activity, whether it be capitalistic, whether it be wars that are being with no end in sight. We are the empire. So let's just like start here, you know, and we have to reclaim these stories and think about what we're going to do about them. I mean, even with what you're saying, Abby, like the idea of the gun. Yes, that's part of the American social identity. Like the cowboy saves the day. So unless we start to change that story, where that's always going to be, you're depriving an entire part of the population from seeking out what they see a hero as. The hero has the gun. So that's what they see. And telling people they can't have guns, you have to change the mythology first. You have to change that from being the aspiration of seeing that that's the only way that you can have power, right? At the end of the day, it comes to the fact that power has been co-opted by an oligarchical institution that runs this country right now, and we have to hold power accountable. And that power is blue and red. It's not about Democrat versus Republican. We're dealing with oligarchs versus pirates. I think we're pirates, and we're robbing the booty while it's okay. And we have to use that to steer these massive ships to shore, because they need direction, you know, and that's on us. And we have to do that by reclaiming these narratives, reclaiming these stories, and hopefully America decides to tell its own story honestly. And I believe the romantic side of me believes that America actually does want to tell that story, and that there's more of us with that burning fire in our hearts to tell that story, who won't sleep at night and won't stop till that story is told. And we don't have to be the majority. We have to be the dedicated few who keep showing up and keep doing it. And every time I come to these groups and see all of you and all these people who are here to seek to do that, it keeps me going. It keeps my fuel going. And that's why we have to show up for each other in these types of panels. That's why we have to talk about institutional change. And that's why we have to show up to each other's screenings. Because at the end of the day, if we don't make this into a business opportunity, we're always going to be a side order. you know. I throw a little minority spice on it, you know what I mean? I don't want to be a side order, you know. I don't want to be kimchi and hummus, you know, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we got to break out of that.
Kimchi's really good.
I know, but like, you know, like, I think we like, seriously, America should look at, like, we've penetrated the American cuisine, right? Right? Like, it's a lot richer because of us, and we've actually seen now America, you know, the dishes that we used to be minority are now very much in the minority. We need to do the same thing on the filmmaking and media landscape, but allow it to be fresh and real, because homemade hummus is better than Sabra. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you know what I mean? Like,
So, in all seriousness, Karim, you said something really important, which was we got 2 years left of the white guilt, and there is a real danger that in 2021, lots of liberal white folks are like, okay, we did it, we got rid of Donald Trump, now everything is fine. Yes. They will do that because the American narrative is also that a hero comes along or a law gets passed, and liberals love that narrative because it's such a simple ask. It's not asking for people to genuinely change structures, not asking them to give things away. So we also we have to be fighting like hell for 2 years, but we also have to be planning like hell for 2021.
Well, then also, too, I look in this room, there's a lot of younger people that are here, and you guys have the power. You guys are having the power to make that change and what we're all talking about up here, because you've got veterans that you were standing on shoulders there, but this is your moment as well. So don't feel like, oh, I can't do this. I don't know what I'm going to do. You just have to do. I see some of these filmmakers that are here, and they've been working in the trenches a long time, you know, and I know for all of us, we all want to, like, support them. And it's like what you were saying, it's like we have to show up. So it's on all of us, from the artists all the way down to the audiences that you guys are making your films for or making your art for. And that's where we have to encourage. But I look at people who are in their 20s, and I'm older than that, and by a lot. But it's like this type of room, these types of things that are going on now is something that I've always was hoping that we would get there. It's taken a long time, but we are here, but it's not over. And like you said, it's a sprint. But I don't want to look at it as a moment. I want to look at it as a movement. Yeah. And I think, you know, that's what I got from you, Karim, when we were working on the square together. Because there was that movement in Egypt that was just changing. Like, every day people said, And then they brought somebody else in, and they said, no, we don't like you too. So 2 months later, we had to change it again. But I think you guys, and I speak to the people who are, let's say, less than 40, you guys can do this. And the people that are older than 40 continue to do this. So this isn't it, and don't rely on us up here to do it. You guys are individuals who can bring something to the table. The fact that you came up here to Park City says a lot. First of all, that's an investment in time and investment in money. You know, you came here, you're here. But can we throw it to the audience and let's have that discussion going? If you guys have any questions, just raise your hand. You have a microphone, right? And then we can do that. Because I think we want to hear from what you guys have to say. And I've got Lisa in the front here if you want to start with her.
Hi, thank you, everybody, for everything you do. And what I have been thinking about, I'm one of the co-producers of the film Always in Season, which is looking at the legacy of lynching in the United States. And that world premiered here yesterday. And the credit very much goes to Jackie Olive, the director, so I want to put that right out there. What I find really, really interesting is, as people of color, especially, I really focus on producing work by directors of color. We are often telling stories and putting stories out there that don't make white audiences or straight audiences or male audiences comfortable. And I am getting very, very comfortable with knowing that the work is going to make a bunch of people uncomfortable, including the reviewers. And I'm getting very used now to analyzing the reviews, which are still mostly written, the big reviews are still mostly written by white male reviewers. And there is a whole huge PhD in that alone, and how they are receiving the stories that are being told by more diverse filmmakers. And what I want to just share is let us not stop telling our stories the way we are going to tell them and the way we need to tell them and the way we want to tell them and the way we love to tell them and the way we know that our communities understand intrinsically. And if other people don't get it and if other people are uncomfortable, F it. Too bad for them. They're going to get used to it. So there you go.
I mean, this is our power. I think that we need to realize that telling our stories the way we want to tell our stories is our power. All these things that we've been talking about as a community, we've known this for a long time, and people are just catching up. So, you know, whatever story you're telling, whether it's uncomfortable to tell that story, it's just as important. We just need to live in this power and make sure that we continue to create this work because it's beautiful. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a human story, no matter what the cast looks like, no matter what the crew looks like, and we just need to embrace it and run with it because now is the time.
I have a question on that. I mean, I think it is important to tell our stories, but if nobody sees our stories, then what's the purpose, right? Like, how do
because you have distributors, you have
exactly, but
an
how
audience.
how do we hack the system? How do we make sure that the stories that there aren't just a couple hits that then take off the like, oh look, we did a minority thing this year, and that this becomes just how do we use this moment to really turn this into a real business model? And I think we have to push distribution, we have to push hits, and even if that means subsidizing certain costs in certain ways to make sure that some of these, you know, it's not putting as much of a burden on some of these projects so that they do get made and coming in with other places to get the output. Like, how do we use each other's reaches to actually push each other out there and make sure that everybody's talking about this amazing film, for example, that's here at Sundance. How do we work together in that sense? Because if we don't push to make this into a sustainable business model, that's my worry about what you're saying. Is like 2 years from now, it's like, all right, that was a cool trend, and then it's over.
We continue to organize. We continue to get together. We continue to, you know, become a movement. You know, this is a movement. That's how we do it. We need to, you know, look back to our past and how, you know, people politically and in every forum have gone grassroots and created organizations and movements and every single level of that and take that and make sure that that's the cycle that we're pushing. I think that's how we continue to do it. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't tell our stories. We absolutely should, because that's going to be the base of it all.
Yeah.
And we have to support them as well.
Of course. So a couple of thoughts. The first one is, this is just coming up as something I feel like I should say, which is, as people of color that come from diverse backgrounds, one of the things that I do think it's important to acknowledge is like who is the most vulnerable. And I think sometimes like we don't really, we don't always do the work internally ourselves. Like I've been on this journey of like really trying to learn about this country and about the world. I just came back from tracing my family history and the decolonization, that's like a real thing. Like I went and I saw that. It was really heartbreaking. But you know, for example, one of the things that I've spent 2 years like trying to learn a lot more about is the Native American communities in this country. I feel like that's like acknowledging Indigenous history and peoples is such a important part of the reckoning that this country has to have. So I just think that I want to say that to the room is that, you know, we don't want to be congratulatory about telling our stories and patting ourselves on the back, but not really thinking deeply and critically about like what that means. The second thing I would say is that I feel like, you know, there's this fear that we have, which is that, you know, this has happened before and we're used to being marginalized. And I understand that. That's so real and honest. But I think sometimes it doesn't allow for us to acknowledge that there are structurally things that have changed. There are structurally things that are different now. So one of them being the demographic reality that's going to drive the finances of projects, right? I think, like, honestly, that's a huge power. I think one of the things that is amazing about Array is, like, how do we organize our own communities to go out and watch our own projects, right? But, like, I think that is a structural, like, that is a sea change that's going to have to change this business, right? Another thing I would say is with digital media, again, like just it's a more democratic way of getting our stories out there, and it gives us a way to kind of hack into the system. So I think there's lots of ways we can talk about tactics, but I don't want us to come from a place of like, this is historically always what's happened, and not recognize our power, and also recognize like the incredibly real opportunity that exists right now.
Yeah, and I want to reinforce that, because way back when many of you were in grade school, I was working with Marie Wilson at something called the White House Project. We were working on images of women's leadership in media. And we went to ABC and we met with them and we talked to them, and they came up with this series called Madam President. And that was great. But it was the moment, and we worked with them on story ideas. We've done a lot of this already, 25 years ago. But the ABC got jittery; they were uncomfortable with it, even though much of their leadership was actually female at the time. And they took the showrunner off of it and gave it to someone else, who started to write stories more about the first man and how uncomfortable it was for him to be in that position. And within a year, the ratings plummeted and they took it off the air. So it was only on the air for 2 seasons. And so something has changed for sure, because that wouldn't happen that way. It wouldn't happen. There would be a community of people who would be too loud for them to do what they did in terms of taking it for the showrunner. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have the benefit of the internet at the time. There is so much in your hands right now that is so powerful, that you need to recognize, appreciate, maybe even do an inventory of all the powers, magic powers that you have right now that we didn't used to have, and all that has changed, and lock arms with each other and teach the people who are uncomfortable that that's not discomfort, that's just learning. And just keep coming at them and making them uncomfortable, because that's the only way anything's going to change.
Yes. But I think also too, it's for everybody in this room and people who you're taping this and televising this anyway somewhere. But I think anyone who's watching what we're talking about, it's really incumbent upon our audiences and the people that are in the communities, but people who can come out and support these works. Because if we don't have that audience, like you were saying earlier, we're not going to be able to keep pushing this out, and that financial model will not work, and will always be over here, the side dish.
Yes, and we need that. We need the audience, and we need people of color to traverse into kind of telling stories that don't necessarily match with their identity.
Right.
I think that's like, I was in a meeting where we wanted to, Ava's someone who I love and who I've always looked up to and have a good relationship with, and we wanted to approach bringing Ava onto a project. And the reception was, well, it doesn't feel like it's an Array type project. And basically what they were saying nicely was like, because they do like color stories, and this is like not that. So like, why would you go there? Type of thing. And I'm like, but they're good producers. Like, it's not about, but that's kind of how, with all the success, there still is that. It's like, oh, it's not, about that. So like, why would you go there? And it's like, we're not in that. It's not. So at what point is the audition over? Do you know what I mean? Like, what else does Ava have to do, for example, to not be seen that way? And if she's seen that way, imagine how much everyone else is seen, right? So like, that's the thing we have to take advantage of. And I think that it's like, it's amazing to get the minority and put them on the board and put them on the panel and put them on this, but at the same time, we have to be able to get people throughout the whole ecosystem to be able to do that, or else you're just brought in as the feel good. It's like, look, we'd had like 50% more this year, and look at the colors of the people on the street, and look at the, and that's all wonderful. But I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be alarmist, but the reason I'm saying this is 2 things. One, I agree with you, Abby, technology's changed things, but I've just made a film about how technology actually is making us more into silos, and actually we're in more of bubbles than ever we've been before. So actually technology is a double-edged sword, so it is problematic. Yes, it's a weapon, but it's also a crippling tool. So we have to be careful which it is. Secondly, I view that we're at a war right now. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say it straight up. This is a war against the open society. It is being waged all over the world. For some of us who have been living in these minority communities, it's nothing new, but the stakes are epic, because we're talking about this is a force that is now moving into fascist realities across the entire world, right? And the entire image of what a world could look like post-World War II, where some idea of human rights was forged after we burned half the world upside down, is now being unraveled. And that's a major crisis, because in that world, we don't exist. We go back to tribalism, we don't have multiculturalism, we don't have the open society. So we have to really look at ourselves and realize, how are we gonna win this war? Because it is at that level, and it is a very sophisticated level, and it is being funded at the highest level across continents. Oligarchs from the same backgrounds, using technology, using mythology to ignite people's fears, using the same tools that got Barack Obama elected to now use them to sell fear instead of hope. And guess what? Fear sells more, unfortunately, but it does. And that's what's happening. So I hate to be alarmist, but that's, from where I'm sitting, that's how I see things.
So from where we're sitting, Karim, a lot of that is about whose hands are on the Capitol. Because, you know, Ava has brought a lot of money into the space and brought a lot of organizing in space, but she can't, unfortunately, be the whole thing, because the whole thing is billions and billions of dollars, and we're talking about tens
and many
of
decades old.
Yeah,
you know,
and
we've
so
only been kind of going through this for this amount of years. We have a long way to go, but I think that, you know, as someone who's worked closely with her, use her example. She did not come into this industry to be in the studio system. She came into the industry to tell her story, and she was going to do it however it was necessary for her to do it. She built her own. I think that is the example that everyone should take, that with Array, with everything that she's done, it came from a place of really, truly wanting to tell her story however she needed to tell it, and whether it was one person in the theater or if it was 1,000 people in the theater, it didn't matter. You know, that I think that's how we can shift the system, is that we know what the system is, we know how we want to change it, so create your own. This is what independence is about, this is what this festival is about, and this is what being an independent filmmaker is about. And absolutely, we want to be embraced by the studio system and all that. We all want to be seen and heard and all those things just as human beings. But I think her best example is the fact that a lot of these things, you know, she worked as a publicist and a marketer. She figured it out, right, and did it for herself. And so that's what we have to do. We have to do it for ourselves.
I'm not saying I have nothing but the utmost love and respect for
absolutely.
Ava's doing, and for all you guys at Array. What I'm saying is, like, I'm just using it as an example of, like, being in this setting where I was like, I never when I suggested Array as a production partner, I wasn't seeing Array as through any color lens.
Right.
But in the room, there was still that, and that was shocking to me, because I was like, at what point, like, what else do you have to do to not be seen that way?
You have to create your own. And not, you know what I mean? Like, you have to create your own room. You have to create your own space. You have to create your own audience, your own, you know. We have models like Netflix. We have so many, you know, avenues where we can do that, that if someone tells you that in the room, number one, come to me. Don't go to them. You know what I mean? So there's always an alternative, you know what I mean? And they use those weapons to make us feel like this. And right now, we have so much power. We don't have to feel like this.
Let's take another question from the audience. The young lady right here, please.
Hi, Noelle Lindsay Stewart from Define American. We are a media advocacy organization dedicated to shifting the narratives around immigration and immigrants, just making America a more welcoming place. I wanted to touch on what you said about, like, us being at war, essentially. And I think one of the things and one of the problems that we faced is infighting. We've been fed this myth of scarcity of resources with, like, colonization. We look at everything through, like, our community's relationship to whiteness. And that has resulted in a lot of anti-blackness in certain immigrant communities, a lot of anti-immigrant sentiments in black communities, anti-Semitism, all across. Like, how can we as creators, as filmmakers, as content creators, start to hold our own communities accountable for that and bridge down those walls so that we can be, like, truly intersectional and, like, work for shared liberation?
Yeah, I want to. Amazing question, and hi, Noelle, and Define American is amazing, so yes.
Love you, Maria.
One of the things that we do at Harness, and I think this is not an organizational thing, this is like an approach, a modality that we all need to start thinking about, is how do we get into deep relationship with each other? And how do we start to address the really uncomfortable things in the room, like anti-blackness when we talk about immigration? Or, you know, there's this incredible research that just came out that said immigration is, like, incredibly unpopular on the left. forget the right. Like
less than like 8% of like the left actually is pro-immigrant.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, if we want to talk about like our own people, right? Like we've got a lot of work to do. One of the things that we do is that we host an annual retreat where we bring together 100 artists and activists every year, and we bring together kind of like the leaders of social justice movements from different parts of the country, most of whom have never met each other, which is so shocking. And then we bring together artists from very diverse communities. And then they spend 3 days together in deep conversation. And the shifts that have happened and the way that people have started talking about their work and the types of amazing art and collaborations that have come out of that is transformative. But it requires us slowing down and not feeling that scarcity of resources and that competitive feeling, right? Because that's all capitalism. That's all, like, we're steeped in this colonization, right? It's like, it's occupying our minds, and really being intentional about building deep relationships and listening and visiting each other's communities. Like, that's really where we're going to imagine a way forward. Yeah.
We have a question over here.
Hi. No, you hold on. You want me to hold it? Yeah. So just a quick note before I even ask my question. In terms of the term colonization, I love that we're using it in the context of like almost interchangeable with whiteness, because like ask a Filipino or a Korean what color their colonizer is, and it's Japanese. So already it's kind of, you know, the timing is really interesting. But I did have a question specifically about if you are, you know, an Asian American, what advice do you guys have for Asian Americans who don't necessarily have their motherland anymore? You know, Egypt still exists, Japan still exists, China still exists, Hawaii, we don't have our country anymore, Okinawa doesn't have their country anymore. And are we somehow betraying our people if we align ourselves as Asian Americans? And where do we kind of draw that line? And then at what point are we sacrificing our identity by aligning as an Asian American?
That's deep.
I think there's room for lots of different stories, and it doesn't have to be specific to, you know, a region or your race or, you know, where you're from. America is so diverse, and there's just, again, the human story. You know, I think we can all relate to each other no matter what the color of our skin, our experiences, you know, just being Americans or living in America. So there's tons of room for stories, and I think that we shouldn't feel limited in the types of stories that we tell. We shouldn't feel like we should have to tell one type of story. You know, as a people, we have so many stories to tell. So I think that we're limiting ourselves when we feel like we have to, you know, touch on a certain motherland or touch on a certain topic or touch on a certain thing. You know, just tell the story about your experience.
Yeah. My family is South Asian, and we've been in diaspora for over 100 years. And so it's been interesting because I don't feel a connection to India at all. And in fact, it's a genocidal freaking government currently that's trying to kill us. So it's not a great place to connect with. I mean, I just came from there and saw the colonization. But so what I would say is also there's a specificity of place and experience that's really important to story, and it doesn't have to be by country. Like I also think country is a construct of colonization, right? So how do we think about like the place that we're from and the people that we're from in a broader way?
Wow. Other questions from the audience? Over there? Great.
Hi, I'm Shirley Snavy. I run the Vision Maker Media. We're the American Indian and Alaska Native Consortium, like CAAM, only we're...
And you have a film here, right?
Yeah.
What's the name of your film?
Words from a Bear by N. Scott Momaday. Biopic. I just wanted to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Ute and the Goshute and the Shoshone. But I also wanted to talk about what happened last week in Washington, D.C. with the Indigenous Peoples March, the Hebrew Israelites, the Make America Great children, and all of the controversy that's come from that, and that nobody's listening to each other. And it's really going to make or break us as a country unless we just quit social media and only listen to what we want to listen to. I mean, we don't have newspapers anymore. That used to be our common ground, was the newspapers. And I mean, I still get the newspapers, but if they quit the crossword puzzle, I'm quitting the newspaper. But how do we take what we do as filmmakers and story makers and be uniters, you know, and we can learn from each other and respect each other.
I did make an attempt in that direction when I made Armor of Light. You know, my name is revered among right-wing people. They just love my Uncle Walt so very much. And I decided that, you know, because you have to ask yourself, why was I born positioned this way? Why? There has to be a reason. And I thought maybe this is what it is. White evangelical Christians support gun culture by, you know, 90+%, you know, unquestioned, unlimited guns in the hands of pretty much everybody, everywhere, all the time. So to me, having been raised in a Catholic family, it just doesn't strike me as a Christian position. That's not how I was taught on it. So I thought perhaps I could reach into the right-wing Christian community and in all good faith and love, you know, go into some of those churches and say, you know, what the you know. And I found a pro-life evangelical minister who wanted to work with me because he thought I was right. Even though he had a deep history of virulent homophobia and sexism and racism, he had a long history of awfulness. But he and I would go into these churches and I would say, look, I'm a pro-choice feminist. I mean, that's like saying you're Satan in these churches. And I have been all my adult life, but I don't think you're crazy and I don't think you're stupid. And I really, really just want to talk to you. And in every single case, they wanted to talk to me back. And there was an extraordinary conversation, and there was much more common ground on talking about guns than anybody would think. So I'm not sure the newspapers or the networks have helped us as much as we think they have, because what they do is they narrow things down, and they offer the voice to the loudest, the drunk at the end of the bar guy. And what I found was in these rooms, like after the film, we'd do the Q&A, and the loudmouth would get up, and he would say, like, bullying things, and he was really obnoxious, and he was Bill O'Reilly, you know, in every single church. But when he was done, I would say, I wouldn't engage with him. I would say, thank you so much for your input. I really appreciate your honesty, and I'm just wondering if anybody else has something to say. Then there came a really nice conversation. So I have made real, actual, deep friendships with right-wing people. And let's just admit it, they're our Achilles heel, right? We are just all full of love and everything and embrace for everybody except for right-wing people. And I understand why, because there's a hell of a lot of racism happening there. But there is hiding underneath the very loud vitriol, there is a lot of room for conversation. And I was going to say earlier, in terms of this being a viable business plan, that's a pretty coherent community, like just speaking as a marketing person, that can be reached out to. And they have, you know, in terms of marketing, pretty targeted media that speak to them, and we are ignoring the hell out of them, and they want to hear from us. They are so much, they're under 30, are so much more positive about homosexuality, so much more positive on race, so much more positive on immigration, so much more positive on gay marriage than you can ever imagine. The under 30s are only different from you, basically about choice. And so if you want to make some conversation that will actually change people, I suggest you try reaching out to evangelicals.
We have a point over here.
I think you also, with the stories you tell, right? Like we have in our film that played yesterday, one of the main characters, she began as an Obama intern and was there when they're setting up the Facebook page and was deep in the social media creation of political social engagement. And then she's been on a pretty crazy journey, and save that for the movie, but she ends up at, like, you know, as one of the lead people at Cambridge Analytica and working on the Trump campaign. And I think in seeing her journey, we go into these kind of both worlds in a way, and glimpses of it, and kind of understand how people can be shaped and can be moved and can traverse and can live in gray. And we need to embrace the gray, you know, I think is the answer. And we need to, you know, I think one of the things that we do with the films I love are always the films that try to, you know, they enter areas where there's a deficit of language, right? Where we don't have the actual vernacular to explain how we feel or what's happening. And the film can create that opening. And so I think, you know, use your craft to do that, you know, and force, and then bring people into it, as Abby's saying, from all walks of life. But I think the responsibility of the artist is to create that space, right? To create that portal and then make it accessible to all walks of life and make it accessible. And like, I think the biggest compliment that comes to me is when someone who comes from a totally different political identity can relate to my film, because to me that means that like I've pierced through the shield of politics and I've tapped into humanity. And that's the power that we have. That's the gift that we have. That's the ultimate privilege that we have, is the ability to tell these stories that can do so.
May I just react to something, Abby, that you just said? And I think the reason why I want to share this is because I think it has everything to do with perspective and upbringing and culture. So much of what you've said today has, I think, been brilliant. But you just made a comment about how you have deep and lasting relationships with people who are right-wingers. And I liken that to the difference between me, who is of African and Chinese descent, grew up on welfare, and maybe you, is that I make up in my mind that you're the person who, when Thanksgiving dinner is held and family members from all over gather at the table and a difficult conversation comes up, the matriarch of your family can say, yeah, but we don't want to talk about that now. It's Thanksgiving. We don't want to discuss this at the family table. And then we table it. In my family, it's life or death, right? We don't have the ability to say, this is probably not the forum, and we don't want to hurt people's feelings, and let's maintain and recognize and understand. I say that because in the context of young filmmakers, I think everybody has to know what your role is. This is not a homogenized group, right? People come at it different ways, and some people are going to advocate for some things, and some people are going to advocate for others. I just want to say that in my entire life, I don't think, and I'm 67 years old, I have not and cannot make a statement that I have lifelong, deep relationships with right-wingers. I'm not going to. Because in order for me, just me, coming from where I come from, and somebody in my family may have a different perspective, but I want to give these young people the option of not going along with what you said. Because I think it's important to understand that there is a war going on. And a part of what happens for all of you is you're in the room and something happens and you say, is it me? Is it just me? It's not just you. They're trying to make you think you're crazy. And you have to understand when that happens. So at my dinner table, here's how it works. That right-wing ain't getting a seat at my table. Not gonna happen. Take that somewhere else where somebody is going to try to engage with you. I am perfectly fine being over here in this position, and I don't want to hear what you said. Now, maybe that doesn't make me the right kind of filmmaker, but I am a filmmaker.
I thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. And I am 100,000,000% in agreement with what you just said. I am very privileged, like I say. So privileged, in fact, that I can't see the water I swim in a lot of the time. And that privilege, because I enter into no risk personally when I walk into those churches, I recognize that I can do that. So this is this is always a problem in social change. This is always going to be a problem because there's always going to be a group of people who can't engage, and then there's going to be this group of people that has to change. They have to change. They are such a huge part of this country and who they are, and they have led us by the nose for 30 years now down this stupid neoliberal nonsense, which has led us into this awful mess we're in. If we don't change that core group of people, and the only way to do that is to go to them where they are, that means that my role, because I'm privileged, is to go there and your role is to go there. And we know our parts. And I just want you to know, I'm not the matriarch at the dinner table. Believe me, I've been kicked out of more Thanksgiving dinners than you could possibly imagine.
So we have time for 2 more questions. There's a young lady here and the young man behind her.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm a little nervous and my palms are shaking.
It's okay.
Greetings and blessings. My name is Joanna Cruz and I'm the WOO manager. I'm sorry I'm gonna cry because I'm just feeling the energy of this room and so inspired and just feeling just grateful for everyone to come here into the space to be able to have dialogue and to be able to break the boundaries of like our own, like whether it's institutional or constitutional mentalities, to like really see each other. And that's really the work that I've been doing like for the last like 10 years. And I'm just thankful to be in the space with my community and people here, as well as all of you who I hope to build with and bridge with moving forward. I had like so many questions, but now I'm like shaking. I wanted first to acknowledge the indigenous people of this land, the Northern youth, who are committed to and thriving here to continue to, who are committed to create a thriving community within their people, but also are working hard to preserve the natural and cultural richness of the Barriers Monument. So thank you to the producers here and the indigenous people here represented in this room. I wanted to just quickly address what was being said in regards to privilege and right-wing people. I think that they come in all colors and all cultures, and as a person who comes from a diverse group of blood-related and non-blood-related people, I have done my very best to create spaces to be able to have dialogue and conversations with people who are not like me so that we can form these bridges, and I want to like really encourage people to do that. My tool has been art and music, and to be able to really bring those stories, in those forms, I feel like is the way that we can sonically and also in a heart space really come together and make these stories not just like tell like the problems and the issues that we are all already like pretty much aware of, but really bring the solutions, come up with solutions together. I personally am very passionate about climate change, and I feel like it affects all people. It doesn't matter where you're at, especially people of color, low-income people, and people living in the places like the islands, like the Philippines, where I come from. And so I just wanted to just take a moment to say thank you to everyone for creating this space and for bringing all of us together. And I want to continue this dialogue, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one more behind you.
Hi, I'm from Chinatown, New York. I grew up there. And the Chinatowns in this country are dying. Why are they dying? They're being gentrified, and our story's been hijacked. In New York, there are 60 episodic TV shows shooting every week. There's a camera crew shooting in Chinatown. And you know what the story's about? Prostitution, trafficking, stealing our jobs. As Trump would say, China, China, China. Last week, some guy came in with a hammer in Sheepshead Bay and killed 3 Chinese workers because they're Chinese. But it's not a hate crime in China, in Chinatown. We're invisible. We've been here 150 years, and nobody knows our story. This year, May 10th, is the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroads. And if you ever look at a picture of the Transcontinental Railroad, there's not one Chinaman in that picture. When I tried to get into Local 52 IA, I've been there 40 years in the IA. I was the first Chinese guy in the local. You know what they told me? You don't have a Chinaman's chance to get into this local. And I was the first one in. And the one thing that all my workers who are blue collar, Trump supporting, China-hating people, I have to correct them every time I hear a story. Oh, China's stealing our jobs. Oh, China's eating dogs. How do we correct that narrative? How do we get our people in the writer's room when the country doesn't even recognize that we even exist?
This is what we're all about. This is what we're trying to do. Honest to God, this is what we're trying to do.
I think, I mean, yeah, what you just said is so powerful and beautiful and real, because being invisible is, it sucks all your humanity out of you. It's like you're lost without visibility. Really, it's not like we want to be visible because we just want to, you know, enjoy life. We want to be able to be acknowledged that we're human. You know, that we're not always kind of auditioning still. And I think, in just kind of this has been an amazing conversation. You know, the word colonization is something that really triggers me, because coming as an immigrant to this country and coming from Egypt to America, you know, the Middle East has such a colonial history, as many places do, and you know, these constructs like West, you know, I always ask, like, west of where, you know, like where did the West begin and end? And we have to ask ourselves these constructs and how they allow the othering to continue, you know, and I think it's amazing that we're at this moment where a lot of constructs are finally being recognized, right? As, you know, like, whether it's whiteness, whether it's patriarchy, whether it's, you know, the colonial legacy, and hopefully the concept of the West in itself, because I think that's one of the main roadblocks we have to having a true open society. You know, it's like, if we're talking about the open society, if we're talking about the dream of multiculturalism, we have to destroy this concept of West versus East, because it's just simply, it's not historically true, it's not logically true, and it denies all of the human story of torches of story being passed from one corner of the earth to the other. That's how we've survived. You know, that's the reality. But as soon as we put up these walls of construct, we're reducing people to this tribal perspective. And just the last thing I want to say is about the war, because I've been thinking about this through this conversation. And I think that there is a war, but I think, as you know, as we've gotten to this conversation, everyone has a different role to play. And I think that, for me personally, I feel like, you know, piggyback off what she was saying so brilliantly, it's like we have to kind of build our own, and I think we have to build our own lanes and spaces and allow people, like, we need to lead the cultural tide and allow the rest of America to catch up with us. We don't have to go into their communities and fix their miseducation. We fix their miseducation by inspiring them in a different arena and have them come to our arena. But then on us, though, we need to also hold ourselves accountable to not judging people and not reducing people who we thought were bad or who we thought are this, who we've never met, right? And not allowing them the opportunity to change as well. Because if we do that, then we're being hypocritical to our own oath to this openness, right? And so we have to also create the space for people, no matter what they've done, to be able to redeem themselves. If we don't have a space for societal redemption on a human level, we are never going to get anywhere. And I think that's an important thing we have to do.
Yes. As we're starting to wind down, I want to have you guys give any parting thoughts at the end. Let's start with you, Abby.
Redemption, that's a great word. And I think, you know, as the person on the panel who talks the most about privilege, that's the obviously a key word for me, because I feel I've spent my life wondering if I'm redeemable or not. And I've taken it upon myself to make my life be a sort of retroactive act of redemption for what was done in the past by not just my family on my father's side that's better known, but really more especially my mother's side. And I'm trying really hard not to judge the people who are politically so far from me that I don't even begin to understand them. And I just want to tell you that when I approached the minister to work with him on the film, I said to him, you know, we could fight right away about abortion. We could really do that, and we'd hate each other and we'd leave. But if we just decide to table it for this moment, which is not to say we'll never talk about it, just in this moment, and choose to talk about everything else, and choose to inhabit the spaces we share and spend time on them, by the time we do talk about it, we'll have enough of a relationship that we won't want to kill each other when we do. And I learned that because I came from a very right-wing John Birch Society, Reagan-supporting family. I had to love the people I was born with. You have to. And I violently disagreed with them, and I worried that they were bad people, but they weren't, and I loved them. And in this room, they would be seen as irredeemable to a lot of you. I've worked with the minister for about 2.5 years before I told him I'd had an abortion myself, because I was afraid that I was leading him on and telling him an untruth in not revealing that to him. And he said, why would I not want to work with you once I knew that? And honestly, he was more of a Christian than I knew. And I'll tell you now, Reverend Rob Schenck is probably the biggest ally you'll ever find in Washington. He's with us on every issue. I kind of overshot and turned him into a lefty. And he's completely, people can be changed. And they won't be changed because we're yelling at them. They're going to change because we're in relationship with them, which is why I'm committed to storytelling, because it's the best way to be in relationship with the world.
Yeah. Marya?
Thank you. First, I want to thank the gentleman in the back who shared your experience. I think that it takes a lot of vulnerability to share that, and I'd love to talk to you afterward, because one of the things that we try to do is bring people from communities that are invisible into spaces where they can really share that and hopefully shape stories about those communities. So if we can do that, let's do that. In terms of like parting thoughts, there's a couple things that I've been thinking about. The first is actually both of them fall under this idea of like, what is the internal work that we need to do? So yes, structures exist. There's this systemic injustice. There's the history that we're grappling with, and all of that is real. And also like I think are the things that I feel like are often the biggest challenges in rooms like this is cynicism, fear, and really feeling like we can't acknowledge our own power, and then we can't get beyond just the community we come from and be in relationship, in deep relationship with each other. I think if we were to organize across communities and across the kind of access that we all have and the power and the stories and the rich histories that we all have, we would be able to transform the industry. I really do think so. And I think part of that means that we have to do really deep internal work across our own kind of biases and communities to really learn from each other and understand each other.
Tilane?
I'm hoping that, through this conversation that, you're able to take away from it that you should continue to tell your stories, that your stories are important no matter what they are, and that you have people that want to support that within your communities, people that are sitting on this panel and people that are sitting in this room, and that no matter what those stories are, we're here to support you and hold hands together to change the system, because it's going to take us, all of us, to be able to do it on every level.
Can I just say one thing before you, Karim, because you're going to be brilliant, and then I'm not going to want to, and you're brilliant. But I just want to say one last thing to my sister over here, whom I really love. I just want to add that I recognize that I do what I do because of the privilege I have. Frankly, if I don't, shame on me. So for the people who can't do the things that I do, I just want you to know, I promise you that I will carry what you can't. And I promise you that I will carry what you ask me to carry.
Karim?
I can't top that. Now it's like, I just want to say first, before we get back pulled into this, I think it's important to just remember that where we are and how incredible it is for that dreams really can come true. Like, I came to this festival in 2012, and it was right after the heart of a year living in Tahrir Square in extreme conflict zone, capturing this moment of hope and terror that was all mixed together, and living with a team of people, capturing over 1,600 hours of material. Came to this festival with a laptop and was going around showing a little trailer to people, trying to cobble a little money together. And a few years later, we had the film in the festival, and here we are again with another film. And it's just, it is, you have to believe in the unbelievable. You have to, and don't stop believing in the unbelievable, because we can make the impossible possible. And we all have the ability to do that. And when we do it together, we can actually create the systemic change we're talking about. So I just want people to have that hope as well, since this has been a complicated conversation. And one last thing I want to say about redemption and about what Abby was saying. I think, you know, each of us in this community, you know, when we go into our smaller communities of like micro groups, we all have members who, if they committed an irredeemable act, we would hold very like, it would be a situation. You know, we just don't air that to that larger group, but it happens. And I think, like, you know, coming from a Muslim background, you know, we have to grapple with the act of terror. Right? And how do you make sense of that, right? And my sister, who's right here, is an amazing filmmaker, has actually been making an amazing film about that, going to the people who have been seen as the most irredeemable, right? People who are involved in the Charlie Hebdo attacks and people who are involved in the Paris attacks, and trying to make sense of who these people were and how did they get to that place where they found nothing else but that the only hope was to strap a bomb to themselves and blow themselves up. What happens to someone to get there? And if we can't find redemption there, I challenge you to find redemption there, right? Because if those people can be redeemed, then I'm not worried about your Thanksgiving dinner, you know? And I think it's important that Abby is here, and it's important like that she's willing to have these conversations is an important acknowledgement. And Abby is trailblazing because I can't name anyone else like her, to be honest. So I think it's important to have people like here who are open to having this conversation and learning and walking away with it and coming and putting, you know, connecting with all these people and being willing to listen to anybody in the room. This is this is what an open society looks like. This is what we have to protect and preserve and expand upon.
So with that, I just want to say thank you. This has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank all of you on the panel for sharing and opening up and just, I mean, this is one of the more real panels that I've seen here at Sundance. I want to thank CAAM. I want to thank the Sundance Institute. And first, also, I want to thank you guys for showing up and being here and being part of the conversation. And I want that you take the same spirit that we have up here out with you when you go back outside where it's nice and cold, but also when you're seeing films. But support these filmmakers, support all of them. I see a lot of you guys in here who have films, and I praise you guys. We've got, on the Asian American tip, we've got over 60 filmmakers and producers and artists who have films in this festival. That's unheard of for us. So I think this is the moment. It's a movement. Embrace it. And thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you to David Magdael. David Magdael.